The crowd gasped in unison. Time seemed to freeze as the muscular bulldog lunged toward the stoic royal guard, its chain leash scraping across the pristine courtyard stones. Tourists scrambled backward, phones raised to capture what was unfolding. The guard, a decorated veteran who had stood at attention for nearly 2 hours without so much as a blink, now faced an unexpected challenger. No one intervened. No one dared. What happened in the next 60 seconds would be shared millions of times across the globe, leaving viewers questioning everything they understood about duty, restraint, and the quiet power of dignity under fire. The morning had begun like any other at Buckingham Palace. Sunlight glinted off polished brass buttons as the royal guards performed their ceremonial changing of the guard. Among them stood Sergeant James Barrett, a third-generation military man with 12 years of distinguished service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. His impeccable record was matched only by his unwavering dedication to upholding the centuries-old traditions that tourists traveled thousands of miles to witness. Among the day's spectators was American businessman Richard Hempstead, a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley whose recent app sale had netted him millions. Hempstead had arrived in London 3 days earlier with his prized English bulldog, Winston, a muscular, 60-pound purebred that he'd paid a small fortune to bring on his private jet. According to later witness accounts, Hempstead had been loudly boasting to fellow tourists about his connections to British aristocracy and how these ceremonies are basically just tourist theatre anyway. The atmosphere around the palace grounds had been reverent that morning. Children stood on tiptoes to glimpse the legendary guards, elderly veterans removed their hats in respect, and visitors from around the world maintained a respectful distance behind the barriers. All except Hempstead, who repeatedly ignored the palace attendants' polite requests to keep his dog leashed properly and maintain distance from the ceremonial guards. "Rules are for people who can't afford to break them," he was overheard saying, as he allowed Winston to strain against his expensive leather leash, moving ever closer to the forbidden zone where Sergeant Barrett stood motionless at his post. The confrontation began when Hempstead deliberately crossed the velvet rope separating visitors from the ceremonial area. A palace attendant immediately approached him. "Sir, you must return behind the barrier with your dog," she said firmly but politely. Hempstead's face flushed with entitlement. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snapped, loud enough for nearby tourists to turn their heads. "I donate more to British cultural preservation in a year than you'll make in your lifetime." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Parents pulled children closer. An elderly British couple exchanged knowing glances of disapproval. "Sir, the rules apply to everyone, regardless of status or contribution," the attendant persisted, maintaining remarkable composure. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would later give conflicting accounts. Hempstead, now performing for the growing audience of onlookers, dramatically loosened his grip on Winston's leash while announcing, "Maybe my boy Winston wants to meet a real royal guard. Let's see if these guys are as disciplined as everyone claims." The bulldog, sensing freedom, immediately charged towards Sergeant Barrett's post. Several tourists screamed warnings. A child began to cry. Phones emerged from pockets and purses to document the spectacle. Barrett remained perfectly still as 60 pounds of muscle and determination bounded toward him, drool flying from Winston's jowls. The dog stopped just short of the guard, barking ferociously, close enough that witnesses could see spittle landing on the guard's freshly polished boots. Hempstead made no move to retrieve his dog. Instead, he pulled out his own phone, narrating loudly, "This is going to go viral. American Bulldog challenges British Bulldog. Who's got the real backbone now?" The tension in the courtyard was palpable. Children clutched their parents' hands. Veterans stood straighter, their faces tightening with concern for the tradition being mocked. Palace security began moving toward the scene, but they were still precious seconds away. Winston, encouraged by his owner's laughter, began circling the guard, occasionally lunging and snapping at the ceremonial uniform that represented centuries of British heritage and sacrifice. Through it all, Sergeant Barrett remained motionless, eyes fixed forward, the only indication of his awareness being a slight tightening around his jaw. The bulldog's barking echoed across the previously reverent courtyard. Just as palace security arrived at the scene, something remarkable happened. Without breaking his formal stance, Sergeant Barrett's eyes shifted downward to meet the bulldog's aggressive stare. No words were spoken. No dramatic gestures made. Just a calm, unwavering gaze that contained generations of discipline. Winston, previously frenzied with aggression, suddenly went quiet. The bulldog's posture changed, his ears flattened, and to everyone's astonishment, he slowly lowered himself to the ground in a display of unexpected submission. When the guard finally spoke, his voice carried across the now silent courtyard with quiet authority. The uniform I wear has been defended by the blood of men and women who believed in something greater than themselves, he said, still maintaining his ceremonial stance. Your dog understands respect better than you do, sir. The crowd stood transfixed. An elderly veteran in the audience removed his hat and placed it over his heart. A young girl whispered to her mother, "Is he a superhero?" A Japanese tourist wiped away tears. Barrett then did something unprecedented. He broke protocol just enough to bend slightly at the waist, extending an open palm toward Winston. The bulldog, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, approached slowly and sat obediently beside the guard's polished boot. Hempstead, suddenly aware that his performance had backfired spectacularly, stammered for words as his face reddened not with anger but with dawning shame. The palace security team had arrived but stood back, recognizing that a more powerful force than their authority was already at work. Some forms of strength require no violence, Barrett continued, his voice carrying emotion but remaining steady. Some forms of respect must be earned rather than demanded. Your companion understood that instinctively. By nightfall, the video had spread across every major social media platform. #RoyalGuardian and #DignityWins became trending hashtags worldwide. The original clip, captured by a German tourist, garnered over 12 million views in less than 6 hours. Soon, multiple angles of the incident emerged as other tourists shared their footage. On Twitter, military veterans from around the world weighed in. This is what real strength looks like. No shouting. No aggression. Pure, concentrated discipline. At Veterans Pride. I served 20 years and never saw a more powerful demonstration of what the uniform truly means. At Marine Corps Dad. Celebrity responses poured in, with actors, musicians, and even world leaders sharing the video with comments about dignity under pressure. A famous British actor wrote, "I've played heroes on screen for decades, but what that guard did today, that's the real thing." Educational institutions took note as well. Within days, the clip was being shown in character education classes across Europe and America. A prominent child psychologist appeared on morning television explaining, "This is a masterclass in emotional intelligence." Notice how he recognized that the dog wasn't the problem, it was responding to its owner's energy. By offering respect to the animal, he taught everyone a lesson about true authority. The Royal Palace, traditionally reserved in its public communications, released a brief statement acknowledging Sergeant Barrett's exemplary representation of the values that have guided our armed forces through centuries of service. Military recruitment websites reported a 40% increase in traffic in the days following the incident. Perhaps most telling were the comments from ordinary viewers across the globe. "I watched this with my 10-year-old son. We had the best conversation afterward about what real courage means." YouTube comment with 50,000 likes. "As someone who trains dogs professionally, what happened here is extraordinary. Animals recognize authentic authority. You can't fake that kind of presence." Reddit top comment. For Richard Hempstead, the consequences were swift and multifaceted. Palace security had detained him immediately following the incident, and he faced charges for violating royal property security protocols and endangering a serving member of the armed forces. His legal team's attempts to minimize the incident as a misunderstanding crumbled when multiple video angles clearly showed his deliberate actions. But the legal repercussions paled in comparison to the public fallout. Investors in Hempstead's newest venture publicly withdrew their support. A tech conference rescinded his keynote speaker invitation. His social media accounts became flooded with such overwhelming criticism that he eventually deleted his online presence entirely. Perhaps most painfully for a man who had built his identity around acceptance in elite circles, Hempstead found himself unwelcome at the very establishments he had once frequented. The prestigious London club where he had boasted of membership released a statement reaffirming their commitment to the values of respect and dignity that formed the foundation of British society. In a surprising development 3 weeks after the incident, Hempstead requested a private meeting with Sergeant Barrett. Palace officials initially declined but reconsidered when Barrett himself expressed willingness to meet. No recordings exist of their conversation, but sources close to both men described a profound exchange. Hempstead emerged from that meeting visibly changed. At a press conference the following day, he appeared without his usual bravado, speaking softly about learning hard lessons about the difference between wealth and worth. He announced the establishment of a substantial fund to support veterans' mental health services and a program bringing therapy dogs to wounded service members. As for Winston the Bulldog, he became an unexpected symbol of redemption. Animal behaviorists noted how the dog's immediate response to Barrett demonstrated the universal language of authentic authority. Winston was enrolled in a service animal training program, his natural intelligence and newfound discipline making him an ideal candidate. 6 months after the incident, Sergeant Barrett stood at his post as he had countless times before. Little had changed in his daily routine. He still woke before dawn, polished his boots to a mirror shine, and performed his duties with unwavering precision. Yet everything had changed in how the world perceived these silent sentinels of tradition. Tourism officials noted a marked difference in visitor behavior around the palace guards. Where once tourists had sometimes treated them as props for photographs, there was now a palpable sense of reverence. Children were overheard asking parents about the meaning behind the uniform. Schools incorporated visits to the changing of the guard into lessons about character and integrity. Barrett himself received hundreds of letters from around the world, many from parents describing how they had used his example to teach their children about dignity under pressure. Military academies requested his presence at graduation ceremonies. Yet through it all, he maintained the humility that had made his actions so powerful in the first place. In a rare interview granted months after the event, Barrett was asked if he had forgiven Hempstead for the disrespect shown that day. "It was never about forgiveness," he reflected. "When you wear this uniform, you represent something timeless, values that have guided generations through war and peace. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about myself being disrespected. I was thinking about all those who had worn the uniform before me and all those who will wear it after." As for Richard Hempstead, his transformation proved lasting. The man who once measured worth by wealth now volunteered weekly at a veterans' hospital, Winston faithfully at his side. The Bulldog, once a status symbol, had become a bridge to understanding the very values Hempstead had once dismissed. In an age where viral moments typically fade within days, this encounter continued to resonate because it touched something universal: the human capacity for both arrogance and redemption, the quiet power of dignity over dominance, and the truth that some lessons come from unexpected teachers, whether they stand on 2 legs or 4. What would you have done if faced with such public disrespect? And more importantly, what does your answer reveal about the person you are becoming?